We're going to be packing a whole lot into this half-hour time slot. So I'm going to jump right in and have our panelists, Megan, Sunny, and Kendra, introduce themselves. Megan?
Thanks, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Miller, and I'm the Grants and Programs Manager for the Precision Conservation Management Program started by the Illinois Corn Growers Association. We are a nonprofit organization, so really what I spend most of my time doing is aligning the priorities of our private partners, such as PepsiCo and the Kentucky Distillers Association, with priorities of funders, such as National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, USDA, NRCS, to secure funding for our organization and keep our program going. I can pass it to the next panelist.
I believe that's me. Good morning, everyone. Catherine, thanks for having me. My name is Sunny Kircher. I'm an account manager at Biome Makers. At Biome Makers, we provide soil insights. We leverage advanced soil genomics, so using DNA sequencing to measure soil biology and combine that with ecological modeling. So we're able to transform complex data sets into simple insights. And the primary sectors that we support are ag input manufacturers in R&D, CPGs in supply chain evaluation and supporting their producers, and then also ag retail and advisors. Wonderful to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
It's me next. My name is Kendra Castain. Thank you so much for having me today, and I hope everybody is staying warm and healthy wherever you are. Yeah, I am the founder of Ag Sustainability Solutions, but more recently taking a public role with a Fortune 500 company to decarbonize their supply chain. And my day-to-day certainly looks like finding real, tangible solutions that are not only innovative, but strategic to reduce or remove or avoid emissions within the supply chain as it relates to nature-based solutions, land, agriculture, and obviously animals are a part of agriculture too. So I look forward to talking more.
Thank you all. Well, let's jump right in. Kendra, what do you think consumers misunderstand about sustainability in the food they eat or the commodities they consume?
Well-educated consumers. They are showing up at the grocery store and they are very much in power of letting the brands know what they're wanting to see. And I think that's what we're seeing in this new administration with the MAHA movement. So in regards to what they're misunderstanding, that farmers are motivated, farmers are engaged, and the good farmers and motivated farmers are definitely, hopefully, having the right personnel at the tables to make those changes and working with their supply chain, if it's with their cooperative, if it's with their local association, check off, and grower association. So I think on the consumer side, very little misunderstanding. And if anything, it just would be that farmers are really engaged.
Thank you so much for that, Kendra. Sunny, your company's product is all about soil health. How have you found success in tying that into the need stakes of farmers?
This is such a fantastic question. And I'd say, first of all, you don't really need to tell a farmer that their soil is important or a valuable asset to protect and to manage. Since before we've had all of these fancy tools to measure soil, even fertility testing, I think that was a pretty clear truth that soil is important to growing healthy plants. And so that is an easy proposition as far as being able to measure that. And really where our product, B Crop is what it's called, is really helpful for farmers is in the agronomic decision making. So not only how do I measure if my soil is healthy or not, but what can I do to improve it? And so that fits in really nicely with the standard model of diagnostics, soil testing, and farm planning from season to season. The answer is yes, and where I think that there's a challenge of matching B crop soil testing with the need stakes of farmers is how do we actually give value to soil health? There's like an inherent value in if the the soil is healthy, then the crops will be more productive and also reduces the need for inputs. And then there's many benefits to that, from environmental to human health, social, etc. But to actually be able to pay a farmer for having healthy soil, I think is a big opportunity for the sustainability industry and for CPGs overall, to meet their goals. And excited to see how this goes in the next few years, even as a lot of the more progressive food brands are starting to focus attention on soil health and find creative ways to measure it, get baselines, and track changes over time.
Sunny, I think you teed things up perfectly for Megan and this question of profitability and sustainability and how sometimes it can be uncomfortable to talk about or even get swept under the rug. And sustainability tends to get packaged as a virtuous thing, at least to consumers, and seen through that lens only. How can we do a better job of having that profitability conversation with farmers and companies that buy their commodities?
Yeah, so this is actually the bread and butter of what PCM does on a daily basis. So we actually started as a financial benchmarking service for farmers. We use data, pass by pass data from their farm, to benchmark their operations against certain sustainability practices and look at how much, based on statewide aggregated data, we think they could either potentially make with something like a nitrogen reduction or reducing tillage passes, you're using less equipment, or potentially what are the costs incurred if you're adding a practice like cover crops. And that is what kind of attracted some of our supply chain partners to start doing supply chain and emissions reduction accounting for them within the states that we operate. And so we are able to use that on-farm data showing the costs of these practices or the potential cost savings of these practices to figure out, how much of an incentive a farmer would need from somebody like a PepsiCo or Kentucky Distillers Association to, implement a new practice. And we also know that, there are some long-term adopters out there of these practices. And so we use that same data to show the value of, continuing to incentivize that good work, and preventing any reversals within the supply chain as well.
Thank you, Megan. And this is just a general question for the group. How have you seen the sustainability conversation in agriculture evolve over the last 5 years?
That one definitely over the last 10, but most recently in the last 5, is went from pilot projects to now actually we're talking about profitability. How are we going to pay producers or farmers or growers, for that matter, for the great work that they're doing, especially as it relates to soil carbon sequestration, either in the offset market through offtake agreements, but then even with carbon intensity scores or low emission factors, and that showing up with the commodity that's going to market, right? That climate smart commodities. So it's really cool to see how quickly we're advancing, how great the space is for collaboration over competition, because a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sunny or Megan, do you have anything to add to that?
I do, yes. I completely agree, Kendra. To see carbon programs as an example scale is such an important part of any newer industry, if you will. I'm hesitant to even call sustainability an industry because it really does touch on so much more than the financial aspects here. But the thing that I wanted to add also was this shift that I've observed, especially in the past 2 years, of expanding the conversation beyond just carbon, and into elements like biodiversity, nature-based assets, soil health, and much more holistic. And it's one thing that I like about Regen Ag as a movement, as practices, is that there is a bit of flexibility in what that means. And as organic agriculture is defined as not using chemicals, is wonderful and clear, and a good definition is always helpful when growing an industry. And there's just no way that we can get around that agriculture is very dependent on the region or the crop type or the size of the farm. And so to allow space for that, and determining success within it is so important.
You know, Sunny, you brought up something that leads really well into my next question, and that is the language around sustainability, regenerative ag, conservation. It seems to me that consumers, consumer good companies, and farmers aren't necessarily all speaking the same language around sustainability. And seeing some of these terms mean different things depending on who you're talking to. And I'm curious among the whole group, where do you see the most misalignment between these three audiences? And I'll just give the example, regenerative agriculture versus conservation agriculture. Some farmers really shudder at the words regenerative agriculture, but they embrace the words conservation agriculture.
Great question. And Sunny, you touched on something really important, environmental assets. And with that, I have seen in Australia starting to turn carbon credits, essentially their environmental assets, right? Specifically for biodiversity and creating methodologies around that to enhance and then issue assets for companies to purchase within the supply chain and even outside of the supply chain. But then furthermore, on that water side, water quality side, reduction of sediment loss, tons of sediment loss, and that being a water quality environmental asset. So a digital environmental attribute, if you will. And so there isn't a lot of common language. There is, but there isn't. And so when you're really talking to people and digging into it, just asking those questions, what exactly do you mean by what you're saying? Because it just depends on what part of the supply chain or what part of the climate tech space you're in, because everybody's using different language. And I think as this nascent area kind of progresses, hopefully we will all start to use similar language. But I'm curious to get everybody else's thoughts. I just wanted to touch on, those are great points.
Certainly. Something that comes up for me in this question is I believe that consumer impressions of sustainability, especially for the last 5-10 years, have really been around packaging and like reduction of plastics and reusable bags and reusable water bottles. And whereas, like you mentioned, Megan and Kendra, that on the farm and in like the agricultural industry, sustainability is a lot more tied to environmental impact, I suppose, or like how are we preserving or damaging the environment based on practices. And so I think that story it's really the power of the CPGs to support in telling it, and getting the farmer's story to the consumer to really understand what a farm looks like, and how much I don't want to start damage, but also like harmony that can be with nature there and how a farm is managed. So a lot of power there for the CPGs, and great to see them starting to really own that.
Well, and speaking of some of the alignment that's starting to happen between consumers, CPGs, farmers, where do you see the most common ground? And again, open to everyone.
Honestly, I would say financially, right? I mean, I feel like a lot of what we're doing is working with our partners to say, this is how much these practices cost, and, trying to find a way to get all of these parties to meet in the middle. But the other, you know, some of these really big CPGs, they're very huge companies, right? And so we've seen really good results, like having people from PepsiCo come to rural Illinois, rural Nebraska, rural Kentucky, and talk to farmers. A lot of it is just like very simply understanding everyone's a person, and we're all trying to work for the same piece of good there. And so I think the more we can kind of introduce these two groups of people together that are at such very far ends of each other from the value chain, I think helps a lot, and just having conversation to understand what that common ground is.
Megan, that leads so well into my next question. Who is missing from the sustainability conversation right now?
Answers to that. And the first one is we really need to start having conversations with procurement and sourcing. And because they're the ones that are engaging with these contracts, right? It takes everybody to kind of be engaged and understand it. Sometimes they're complex topics, but really understanding how those contracts are laid out, it's going to secure the future of those farmers, those sourcing regions, and inadvertently that is going to secure the future for that company, especially mitigating climate risks where some regions are under threat. So I think, further down that line, getting investors in the room to really see the bigger picture and having to need to pour in money into that space at the farm level to keep them economically viable, because we have an aging demographic for a lot of these landowners, regardless if they are farmers. I mean, a lot of land goes into agriculture-based products. Curious to get everybody else's thoughts.
Yeah, Megan, Sunny, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll say that to a similar tune of investment, but also lenders and banks that are providing capital to farmers. That's a pretty entrenched industry, and I think what they're used to, the model for lending that they're used to being able to offer to farmers, a lot of times doesn't include more regenerative practices, and they don't have a defined model for evaluating, excuse me, nature assets. And so with that, that's like a major block for farmers to make these shifts. And I'd also say like the landowners, for farmers that are renting or leasing land, that makes a big difference if they're even allowed to experiment, if you will, or to transition into more regenerative practices. And on the other end of the spectrum, one that comes up for me is medical professionals, nutritionists, naturopaths, in even looking at the bigger picture social sustainability of access to nutritious food, and what even like the health impact that this can have on our bodies as consumers, from food that's not produced in more regenerative ways.
Well, and that leads to a question of what do you hope the average consumer understands about sustainability in the next 5 years? And whose job is it to tell that story to them? Is it the CPG companies, the farmers, industry trade associations, nonprofits, doctors, nutritionists? What does everyone think?
Yeah, sorry, my computer froze. I would say yes to all of those people. And I think the biggest misconception I see about agriculture from people that aren't working in it is like the scale of the change we're trying to make. You look at row crop farming, like in the Midwest, right? That is an entire region of the country, and it's a region that people refer to as flyover country, even, right? And so understanding like we are talking like countries worth of land we are trying to manage and change here. And it's going to take time and all of us working together to do it.
That's a very good point, Megan. I remember talking to someone who is trying to explain the scale of American agriculture in Singapore, and the scale just does not translate at all. If you're in many other countries, they think a couple of acres is a lot. As we move towards the end of our time, I have two other questions that I really wanted to ask. One of these, which I would love everyone to answer, is what do you hope we educate our kids about these issues? I remember being a kid, and the narrative that I learned in my childhood was around recycling and picking up litter and, maybe cleaning your plate because there's starving children in Africa. Um, Now we're in a place where there's so much consumer waste, and there's getting to be more awareness of that, even among children. And how can we break down what we can do as individuals and even kids to use our resources better?
I'll start this one. my message is pretty simple, and it's just awareness and trying to eat in season. And I think that we've gotten to a place in our world with technology and science and just the markets, especially here in the US, that you can eat whatever you want any day you want. And it's really separated, I would guess, a typical consumer that doesn't work in agriculture from what it even means to produce food, whether it's growing a crop or raising an animal. And so to shift the story into understanding what's on your plate, what's in your bowl, where did it come from, what were the resources needed to produce that, and to eat in season, I think addresses a lot of our sustainability challenges right now.
I love that, Sunny. Megan, your take.
Yeah, I think yeah, we don't necessarily, we're very much working with the commodity, but I would say also, just understanding like what different ingredients are, understanding that all food has DNA in it. I think just a basic understanding of science, right? There's just and what goes into growing food, and as some of this technology has come on, like what does that mean? Why did that happen? And what does it mean to interact with that on a day-to-day basis, just at a very fundamental level?
Absolutely. You bring up a really important point, Megan, and what does non-GMO really mean? That kind of thing. Kendra.
Both hit on great, points. And just to add another thing in there is food, fuel, and fiber. Where are we sourcing them from? How natural are they? I really believe land and agriculture is an environmental solution. We can renew that. We can restore it. The soil is so powerful, and we're just scratching the surface. And there's a famous quote, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but we owe our existence to the top 6 inches of soil. So I just think it's just so powerful. And if we keep it healthy, hopefully it will take care of us. And just learning from past generations, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But if our next generation can embrace, those mistakes and just know that we want to continue to get better, I think we'll all do better.
And my last question is for each of you again, and Kendra, I'll send it right back to you. How do you think about sustainability differently personally? I'm personally more aware of the work that goes into growing soybeans, that feed the pigs, that puts the bacon on my breakfast plate. And how has your work influenced your day-to-day life?
So I'll start with the latter. The work that I do influences my life because I'm passionate about it. I really believe in it. I wake up every single day and I pinch myself because I'm doing what I love. I'm so passionate about it that I find myself reading about solutions and opportunities and what it kind of means. And then to answer that first part of your question is sustainability, really, if you look at a sweater, this is an analogy, right? And if you pull one thread on that sweater, what else comes with it, right? One loss of a species, what does that do to the entire food web? And if you look at it very holistically, you start to understand that, wow, we really do need to start, getting it right. But fundamentally, people, planet, profit. If we take care of our community well-being and we stay economically viable, we're going to hopefully be caring for our environment, right? Our environment touches on all of those things. So that's a great question.
Thank you, Kendra. Sunny, how do you think about sustainability differently?
I think coming into my role at Biomakers, and even just as I began my career 8 years ago, I was very focused on the microbiome and the power of invisible critters that are everywhere in the world, both in the soil and on our bodies, and how they can be our team. But since working in commercial agriculture, realizing like the social side of sustainability that there is with all of the different actors and people throughout the food supply chain, and that there's a lot of history there of cultural practices and ways that business is done. And yeah, I think it's so important to acknowledge how humans fit into this and the power of our relationships, and how to evolve in smart ways that also acknowledge where we came from.
I love that. Thank you, Sunny. Megan.
Yeah, I'd agree with both Kendra and Sunny 100%. I came from a plant pathology background, so not always microbes for good, right? But you know, being able to zoom out and understand like the whole value chain you laid out when you asked this question, Catherine, and that it's all people controlling different parts of those value chain and making sure there's, you know, you can find similar language to talk to everybody and get everyone on the at the table to, you know, have these conversations and work together.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to our audience for waking up early and coming to today's Creative Snacks. I feel like I learned a lot personally, and it makes me excited for the next generation of sustainability and continuing to have these conversations. And I'm hoping to have another conversation with all of you in the future because you're incredibly smart people, and it's so exciting to hear from all of you in a virtual room together. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having us, Catherine, and thank you to the other panel members and everybody that joined. It's a pleasure.
Well, we are up on time. We said we'd get you out in a half hour, and we will. As a reminder, our next snack event will be March 27th at 7:30 in the morning. And I'm Catherine Ross, the owner of Ross Creative Works. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me. My information's in the chat. Thank you all, and have a good start to your morning.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.